You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
A source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the province.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech with your host, Omar and Khatib. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Excited about today's episode. We talk a lot about the intervention side of medtech, but a bigger side, I think, is the prevention side. How do we get better about screening and preventing things such as cancer? I'm joined today by my good friend, Dr. Lishan Acklog, who's the CEO and founder of Lucid Diagnostics. It's a cancer prevention company. If you're interested in learning more, by the way, before I give you the stock ticker, I always have to disclaim, this is not financial advice. You should not take my advice because I'm just a guy, doing a podcast. But if you're interested to learn more about the company, a couple of resources for you to check out. One is go to the company main website. That's Lucid, LUCIDDX, as in Lucid Diagnostics. So luciddx.com. You can see more about their product. EsoGuard, EsoGuard.com. And then to check out the stock, it's trading on the NASDAQ under LUCD, Lucid, not Lucid the car company, but this was LUCD. And again, not financial advice. Do not listen to this show for any financial advice. This is not financial advice. I can't say it enough. And if you decide to look into it and buy the stock, don't send me a message telling me about it. I don't want to hear about it. Okay. But I do love that you guys believe in medtech. I know we have a lot of investors who listen to the show because they're interested in it. We welcome you. So with that being said, Lishan, thank you so much for joining the show. How you doing?
Great, Omar. Great to be here. It's been a while since we've. This has been a long time coming, so great to finally connect with this.
I know. I went through hell to get you because I think you probably get so many messages online, and then finally we met in person at LSI, and it just kind of goes from then. LSI, big shout out to Scott and Henry. It's such a great show.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I forgot that actually preceded LSI. You reminded me of that. I feel bad, but yeah, no, LSI has been a great meeting. I've been there, I think, since the first one. Every year it gets bigger and better and better. So look forward to the upcoming one in March.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. And for those of you who are new and you're an investor, if there's one show that I would recommend that you attend just to get a taste of all the exciting startups and companies in our industry, go to LSI USA 2025. It's going to be at the beautiful Waldorf Astoria at Dana Point. It's an amazing show. Unless my wife is giving birth or there's an unfortunate death, I'm going to be in Dana Point every spring, just so you know, if anybody's trying to find me. So, Lishan, before we kind of get into the company and the science, if you can kind of give us a little bit of background in yourself, what was your training like, and then how did you come about finding the company?
Sure. So I was a cardiothoracic surgeon, really a cardiac surgeon. I immigrated from Ethiopia, came here in the late 70s, about 45 years ago. I went to medical school at Boston, Harvard Medical School, and I trained to become a cardiac surgeon. My father was a cardiologist. He was one of the first cardiologists was the first cardiologist in Ethiopia. And I had a background in physics, which is sort of how my brain is wired. And I really enjoyed the sort of the quantitative aspects and the technology centered aspects of cardiology and cardiac surgery. So trained at Brigham and Women's in Boston. I stayed on the faculty at Harvard Medical School for several years. And then I came here to New York, to Mount Sinai Hospital, where I served as associate chief and then ran the program at the largest hospital in Phoenix. Throughout that time, even though I was practicing cardiac surgery and focused on really cool things like heart valve disease and new innovative technologies, I was always very much involved and interested and passionate for the role of innovation in medicine broadly, but in surgery and intervention, but in cardiac surgery specifically. So going back, even when I was a resident, I was pretty actively involved with industry. I served on advisory boards for many of the big companies, small startups. I had that bug from the beginning. And then at the later stages of my career, it was mid-career really at the time, in the 2007, 2008 range, started developing some of my own inventions and working with some of my partners on some of our own things as opposed to just helping others. And that led to a transition where we caught the entrepreneurial bug, started several companies while I was still practicing full-time in Arizona. We sold one of those companies, Vortex Medical, which was based on one of my inventions called AngioVac, to AngioDynamics. Raised a single bit of VC capital and made a really good return for them. It was purchased in 2012. And at that point, once we sold Vortex, I realized you couldn't do heart surgery or entrepreneurship part-time. So I decided to leave clinical practice and be a full-time entrepreneur and a full-time MedTech executive.
That's amazing. Yeah, and that's quite a leap as well. But I guess from the extremely intense hours that you spend in cardiac surgery, including the training, it kind of preps you pretty well for entrepreneurship. I'm wondering when you got into cardiac surgery, who were some of the people that you really looked up to? I mean, one of the great rivalries in medicine was Cooley and DeBakey for cardiac. I'm wondering, did some of that sort of inspire you while you're in cardiac surgery, and what was your take on it?
All right, everyone, quick commercial break. If you're a MedTech CEO/founder, or maybe you're a sales or marketing leader at a startup or a scale-up, you're going to want to listen to this. Are you struggling to get in front of your ideal audience, whether that's investors or perhaps clinicians who want to adopt your product? Maybe you're getting ghosted. You send emails and messages and nothing comes back, nothing happens, right? Or worse, nobody knows who you are, right? In business, visibility is everything. And I always tell people, if you want to persuade before persuasion can happen, you have to learn how to get attention. So if your sales team is desperate for traction, clinicians don't know your name, investors have never heard of you, you're losing opportunities every day. And that needs to change now. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. That's where my company, Khatib & Co. comes in. We don't just do marketing, we do growth. We figure out how to engineer markets by creating magnetic messaging that makes you impossible to ignore. And we build high impact strategies, of course, using social media, but other channels such as email, text, and others to help turn content and messaging into commercial pipeline, and it leads into closed deals. As an example, we worked with a surgical robotics company in raising a $31 million Series A, and then they needed help on their pre-market release. So we packed their CRM with 198 surgeon leads and nurtured them down. That ended up becoming 4 closed hospitals. 4 hospitals closed and adopted this technology within a period of 6 months, and they got 2 great key opinion leaders in the process. So whether you're a startup founder wearing too many hats, or maybe you have a marketing team that just spread too thin and they don't have the expertise, my team and I plug in and partner up with your company, and we amplify your reach. From crafting powerful sales scripts to optimizing your team's demo calls, creating content, having it go out on a consistent basis, we transform your outreach into a growth engine. So if you're ready to dominate your market, you're ready to become a known name and people to know of you and take your calls and take your meetings, I want you to act right now. Don't wait anymore, because you've already wasted it plenty of time. Go to growmymedtech.com. That's growmymedtech.com. And I want you to schedule a quick call. My team and I will give you a free analysis with 2 to 3 actionable ideas. There's no strings attached. And if we're a fit, great. We can get partnered up and we can help you go to the next level. And if not, look, the ideas are always free. So do not wait and don't waste any more time. Go to growmymedtech.com right now, and let's make you the go-to name in your niche. Now, let's get back to the episode.
I'm impressed that you actually know that. It was commonplace. Some people who are older than you would know that, because it was literally on the front pages of Life magazine in the 1960s.
I love that. Yeah.
So who you're referring to, cardiac surgery, one of the things I found attractive about cardiac surgery is that, many of the personalities are bigger than life. It's sort of, definitely some ego involved, but some, that comes with a sense of personality. What you're referring to are 2 legendary surgeons and that started in the 60s. Michael DeBakey was at Methodist Hospital in Houston, and Dr. Cooley was under him. And then he went across the street, opened up his own center, Texas Heart Institute, did the first artificial heart while DeBakey was on vacation. They had a huge falling out, and they didn't speak for many years. So I have an interesting little anecdote about that. The people in my life, in my career, that had a big impact were the surgeons that trained me at Harvard, specifically Dr. Lawrence Cohn, who may he rest in peace. But I also had the incredible privilege of I received a fellowship from the National association that covers cardiothoracic surgery, the AATS, to spend a year in Europe. And so I spent part of that time in London with Sir Magdi Yaqub, who's this Egyptian-born surgeon. So we had some roots together. We're both Coptic Christians. And he's a legendary surgeon in specialty. I got to spend 8 months with him, basically operating with him every day. A real gentleman. Just an incredible guy I could go on and on with. And then I also got to spend time with one of his colleagues in Paris, Professor Carpentier, Alain Carpentier, who was a legend in the field. He invented mitral valve repair. He invented the first tissue valves so we can replace people's abnormal aortic valves, or abnormal valves in general, with artificial tissue valves. So both of those were great experiences. And I'm going to loop this back to DeBakey and Cooley. So in 1999, after I had finished this, I got to go back to Paris for a big celebration for Professor Carpentier's supposed retirement, although he never did.
You were there.
Yeah.
Oh my, please the story, because this is like cardiac history. Sorry, I'm excited for that. Yeah.
No, it was an amazing experience because he's a legendary guy, and he brought in every living legend in cardiac surgery, names that we had heard of. Christian Barnard, who did the first transplant. Norm Shumway, I believe, was there, who just rattling off probably 2-3 dozen pioneers, legends in the specialty. He had a big symposium and academic talks. I got to give a talk from some of the work I was doing at Brigham. It was all just an amazing kind of tingling experience. And then the gala event was on the Trocadero, that place that overlooks the Eiffel Tower. There was a big hall with just really lavish gala event to close out this celebration of Professor Carpentier. And of course, Cooley and DeBakey were both there. They had not spoken in, I think, 35 years. And Professor Carpentier was a very dashing, very charismatic gentleman. He's up on the stage and he says, I have one important thing I'd like to accomplish for this. I'm not quoting him directly, I'm paraphrasing him. And he got them to actually shake hands and speak in front of all of us. I was like, wow, this is an incredible experience. And I think after that, they actually buried the hatchets, and they both lived very long lives. I think DeBakey died at 100 and Cooley was in his 90s. And so, yeah, pretty incredible. Little old me was there as part of this celebration in history and cardiac surgery.
That's amazing. Yeah. And just hearing that is just, I actually, so funny enough, just like, if we take a quick sidebar, like I actually met DeBakey when I was like 16 years old at some dinner. And I remember when I met him, like, I was very starstruck. And actually here, I'll show for those who are watching on YouTube and Spotify, just a little bit of history. So like the Life magazine cover you're talking about is this one, right? Two great surgeons that war over the human heart. And then this is, so people think this is the moment.
There. I was there.
This is it, right?
I was in your room there in Paris. Yep.
That's amazing. And it was a bit, I don't know. I always ask surgeons, every surgeon is going to have a bias towards their specialty, but I feel like that had to have been, at least in the 20th and 21st century, by far the most bitter rivalry, because like Cooley was like, I feel like all the rivalries start where one guy is being mentored by another, does something against the other guy, and then they become rivals. Like in neuro,
they learn from they both have egos. They learn to sort of develop that, and they're these were pioneering, outrageously audacious times where people were for the first time operating the human heart, which is thought to be. There was a famous quote from a famous surgeon in the early part of the century that said the human heart is basically off limits for surgery. And so what they were doing, what they were pioneering, it was really heady times, 60s, 70s, the invention of coronary bypass surgery, which became one of the most common surgeries performed, valve replacements, artificial hearts, heart transplant. All of these were happening during that period of a couple of decades. And so they were just unbelievably bigger than life figures. I mean, there's all sorts of amazing, the one that I recall, I know many people who trained with DeBakey, and he probably between the two of them, I think he was a bit more of a hard ass than the other. They both were.
I'd say a bit more by a lot.
Compared to Cooley, Arnold too, but
What I heard at least, yeah.
Cooley was a technical wizard. He could just do 8 heart surgeries in a day, but I worked hard as a resident. I worked 100 hours a week for long stretches of time during general surgery and cardiac surgery. But there was apparently a rotation when you were on Dr. DeBakey's service, and he had an ICU full of really sick patients who had undergone complex heart surgery. When you were on his service, you were there on his service for 6 months continuously. You never went home. You showed up and you went home 6 months later. They fed you, they closed you, and that was it. You never left. And there's a rumor, I don't know if it's apocryphal or now, there was a story that one of the residents got through that 6 months. He was wrapping up. He's really looking forward to, felt good about the fact that he was done. And they tell him at the tail end, it's like, oh, bad news. The guy who was coming in after you, and these are all men, quit. And we don't have anybody else to cover, so you're gonna have to do another stretch. It might be an apocryphal, I'm not sure, but
it might be true because I heard the same story actually. So that's wild. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. It's exciting to see that. And I wonder, I don't know, those rivalry. I mean, I feel like maybe because there's so many. I don't call it crazy, but those were wild times. Like, when you're doing the first artificial heart and everything, there's a lot of experimentation. So it was like really, really wild times. But I wonder, do you feel like there are rivalries, but I don't think you have stuff like that anymore these days.
When I trained, we had plenty of that still. It wasn't like on the front page of Life, but there was.
Hey, no.
Today, probably less, bro. You can't, the surgeons with those, particularly the cardiac surgeons with those kinds of egos that would throw instruments and rant and rave, and, they would get away with that. There was a very famous surgeon, I won't mention his name, who, when he would get frustrated through the operating room, he would basically say, everybody leave. You're all making it hard, and he would literally kick everybody out of the OR, and they'd have to have another team of scrub techs and anesthesiologists and everybody ready on standby in case he had one of his meltdowns, right? That wasn't that long ago, but you can't do that anymore. You'll be in HR and there's no way that.
Just before we get back to Lucid, like there's 2 things I want to like recommend to listeners. Like if you're really interested in like cardiothoracic, not just history, but you just want to see more of the pop culture stuff, there's 2 things. One is there's a movie called The Doctor, where it's about a doctor who essentially gets diagnosed with cancer, and he becomes
William Hurt, I think it was.
Yes, yeah. That's it. Yeah. But that physician is a cardiac surgeon, right? And like, you see the ego. But the other one, which I think is like, it's probably one of the best scenes. I love it in terms of like, glorification of like this kind of ego in movies, is Alec Baldwin in Malice when he's giving the deposition and he's like, no, like
I am God.
I don't believe in that.
Oh my God, I am God. Yeah.
It's a great, awesome scene. So you guys just go type in "I am God" into YouTube and you'll see the clip. So, okay, you have this windfall with Vortex being sold, right? And so you have a choice: either like A, retire, B, go back to doing cardiac surgery, and you probably could have done it like maybe even part time or something. But you decided to say like, hey, like I'm gonna go be an entrepreneur. How, of all things, did you end up starting Lucid? Because like the
retirement was never a consideration. I was still pretty young. How long ago? In my late 40s. And it's funny you say that being a part-time heart surgeon could have been an option. That wasn't an option, right? So you can be, I know plenty of people in the industry who do continue to practice, right? Dr. Tarver, who just took over for the FDA CDRH, she's an ophthalmologist. She still does weekends, So, what's his name from CNN? The nurse.
Sanjay Gupta?
Yeah, Sanjay Gupta. Still.
Dr. Oz, here's a cardiac surgeon, right? Wasn't he practicing a little bit and then went full time?
Yeah, I don't know when he was on his show. I don't think he was practicing much. We won't get into Dr. Oz.
Okay.
But, so many examples of of that, but not in cardiac surgery. Really, it's very hard to do. When I was making this decision, Boardwalk, you remember Boardwalk Empire?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that was really a big. I really love that show. It was a big deal. And there was a quote from where Jimmy, I think it was, told Nucky, because Nucky was he wasn't the mayor. He was a treasurer of Atlantic City. He sort of had this official job, but behind the scenes, he was sort of a gangster as well. And he was getting more and more involved in the gangster side of it. And Jimmy told him at one point, as he was getting escalating, he's like, Nucky, you can't be half a gangster. And the same thought came to me. You can't be a half a cardiac surgeon. You can be an ER doc and do it a couple of days a week. You can certainly do internal medicine and other things, but cardiac surgery is pretty all consuming. Your patients get sick. Sometimes you need to be at their bedside, at all hours of the day. It's not shift work. And so there's no way to do that. So what there was a very specific episode that led me to decide to give up cardiac surgery and decide to pursue this full time. When we had Vortex, the AngioVac device. I was running around the country proctoring cases. I was proctoring a case with a friend of mine who at the time was chief at the University of Maryland. It was a young woman who had, where we were just to cut to the chase, we were able to avoid her having to undergo her third or fourth open heart surgery by sucking out this clot that was in her heart using our device. It's very cool, very gratifying. The device was still pretty crude at the time, but it went great. And so when we finished, we were going to dinner with Dr. Gammy, Jim Gammy, who was my friend, who did it. And he said, "Oh, hold on a second. I need to go talk to the husband. Would you just hold on, and we'll head out to dinner." So I'm waiting in the lobby while he's in the family waiting room talking to the husband of this patient, and the husband comes out in tears and hugs me. And says, Dr. Gammy said that you were the one who invented and developed this technology. I don't think she could have made it through another open heart surgery. We're just so grateful that that this happened. And that's when kind of the light bulb went off. And I said, the cardiac surgery is very gratifying. It's tough, it's stressful. You have bad situations arise, but for the most part, you can have a big impact and the rewards are great. And that's when I realized that the rewards from medtech innovation could be as great, that you can have an impact on patients and perhaps even a magnified impact. So, there have been
at scale too,
tens of thousands of AngioVac procedures performed since then. So that honestly, that was really the moment where I could actually transition to this full time.
That's amazing. Yeah, it must be such an amazing feeling. My father was a general surgeon, and so, he would talk about that, but also as a son, in the city that we were in a huge city. And so he had a lot of patients. And so just running into people who would say oh my God, your father saved my husband's life, or, it's a really amazing feeling. So, okay. So, but when you decide to go full on entrepreneur, the obvious thing is hey, there's all this, sort of green field in cardiac surgery, but you decide to go into cancer prevention.
That's right. Well, there was an intermediate step. So let me just kind of walk you through it. So,
oh yeah, good. Tell me.
So we decided we closed. Actually, I left even before we closed the Vortex deal. Which is a little bit of a roll of dice. I moved back to New York. We soon after closed the Vortex deal and consummated that. And when we had an innovative model when we launched Vortex. We had this entity called Pavilion Holdings Group, where we would take a small amount of capital, VC money, and try to build a company and get it through commercialization with one round and try to position it for an exit. And we'd had 3 commercial products that were launched, 3 subsidiaries of this incubator that we created. But we were a little bit tired of that MO of going and trying to doing the VC route, trying to get some capital. And so I really literally got back to New York and spent about a year, literally and figuratively, wandering through Wall Street, trying to figure out what's the next chapter in this enterprise between me and my 2 partners. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to create a vehicle that was a durable vehicle. So not one-off, but could be a true vehicle where you could bring in technologies that we knew we would have access to, both our own inventions, but also we still had strong ties with academic medical centers, with academia, physician innovators, and so forth. So we wanted a vehicle that could bring in these technologies and get them to commercialization in a single entity. We wanted to be diversified. Like to your point, we didn't want to just limit ourselves to cardiac. We wanted to anything that came along the pike that seemed like it would be a good opportunity. We wanted to have the option of pursuing that. And then the most contrarian thing is, how do you fund that? How do you capitalize it? I mean, just by happenstance, I happened to run into several folks who had strong ties to the small cap, micro cap public markets. And we decided we were going to turn this entity public from the very beginning. So we created PAVmed, which is the parent of Lucid, and did a $5 million IPO as the vehicle to bring in these technologies. And we were working typically on some medical devices when the Lucid opportunity came about. I was in 2018. I got a call from a former colleague of mine from Harvard Medical School, Dan Simon, who was president of University Hospitals Cleveland. He calls and said, "Hey, I know you have this company PAVmed that's looking for interesting technologies. I have these faculty that have this brilliant 2 technologies for preventing esophageal cancer. What do you think? It's something you'd be interested in?" I'm like, I don't know. I don't know anything about diagnostics. We're surgeons. We do interventions. We're more gadget guys as opposed to, laboratory science folks, right? And but we did know about esophageal cancer because we had trained as thoracic surgeons. So we knew how we'd been involved in esophageal surgery. We knew how brutal esophageal cancer was, and anything that could help had a big opportunity. So we looked at it. We passed. Believe it or not, and came back about 6-7 months later when they published a seminal paper in Science Translational Medicine in January of 2018. And to his credit, Dr. Simon came back and said, "Hey, look, here's this paper. This things we looked at that. We're like, we've got to be in this space because this is to create an opportunity to both have a commercial and a clinical impact that we are going to become a diagnostic company." And we went there. The entire team, which was like 6 of us at the time, flew to Cleveland, and a little bit apocryphal, but locked them in a room and said, "You're going to license this to us, whether you like it or not." There were other large companies that were actually vying for this technology, names you would recognize, and we made the case that we would be the right partners for them to get this on the market and truly own what was their baby, something that they'd been working on for a decade. And so that's how Lucid started. Lucid was created as a subsidiary of PAVmed to bring in this technology from Case Western and bring it to commercialization.
Fascinating. That's very interesting. So this would PAVmed technically be categorized sort of like a SPAC or an SPV?
No, it wasn't a SPAC. It was just a traditional front door IPO that we literally just did a front door Lucid IPO, NASDAQ IPO, and rang the bell in April of 2016. Some people would say it was an incubator, but it wasn't really designed to be an incubator. It was designed to be just a diversified commercial medtech company.
I would imagine investors invested back then because you and your partners had this great exit to AngioDynamics. So it was okay, that's they're investing in the talent essentially.
Right. The track record and the opportunity to have a diversified pipeline. Now, markets shift. That was pretty, there was a lot of speculative capital that was pursuing that at that time, and markets shift, towards more, less pipeline oriented and more sort of what do you have actually in the commercial realm. And so we've evolved. PAVmed has evolved as a company, and Lucid has evolved as its primary asset over that period of time in response to those market forces.
Got it. Before we get into, what type of evolution it went through, let's talk about I guess the main problem you saw, which is esophageal cancer. So, and maybe this is the wrong comparison, but with esophageal cancer, you have a very, very high mortality rate, mainly because it's caught very late. I feel like it's somewhat similar to pancreatic cancer because pancreatic cancer has the same issue, which is by the time you find out about it, it's already progressed quite far.
Yeah, you've actually got right into my kind of the way I like to give a perspective about it. If you look at what are the 3 deadliest cancers? You mentioned one, pancreatic. That's number 1. Tied for number 2.
Breast cancer?
Nope. The tied for
deadliest.
Highest mortality.
Okay. Okay. So esophageal cancer would be 1.
No. Pancreatic is number 1.
Pancreatic is number 1. The other number, I'm gonna guess esophageal is number 2.
Tied for 2 with liver.
Oh, with liver. Oh, okay. What would be number 3?
Liver. Yeah. So but basically, just think of those three.
Full street. Okay, got it.
Those three for now, right? So those three have very high mortality rates, 80+% 5-year mortality rates. And most of them, as you said, are diagnosed at a late stage, which contributes to that. However, it's not just that they're being diagnosed late. Stage 1 cancers for all three of those, and particularly for esophageal cancer, still carries about a 50% mortality rate. So even if you pick these cancers up at the stage 1, you tend to have a high mortality rate. And if you look at all three of those, they don't get the same attention. People kind of know pancreatic cancer is really bad, but they don't get the same attention that the cancers that we do have active programs for, right? Breast, colon, lung, cervical, prostate to some degree. They don't get the attention. But what shocked me when we were looking into this is that those three cancers, more people die from those three cancers than breast and colon combined. Lung is the number one cancer killer, is a bit more than that. And that kind of put it in perspective to me. The reason why we've had such great success with lowering mortality rates, and there's still plenty of work to do, but lowering mortality rates for those well-known cancers is that we have programs for early detection. There's been literally nothing for pancreas, esophageal, and liver over the years in terms of things that can truly have an impact on preventing deaths. We now do in these technologies with regard to esophageal cancer. Esophageal cancer is now preventable because there is now technology that allows you to detect it early. So that's the key. Esophageal cancer has also skyrocketed. On our website, there's a graph that shows the incidence of cancers over the last 4 decades, and everything else has remained flat. Some of them have gone down substantially as a result of improved early detection programs. Esophageal cancer has gone up 5-fold, 500% increase in the incidence over the last 4 decades.
I mean, just for the visual, I'll bring up that chart. Is it this one right here?
That's it right there. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, and that's a massive.
Yeah, it stands alone. So
why? What caused this to happen? This is just in the last few decades too. What caused this to spike so high?
The assumption is, we don't know for sure, but the assumption is that it relates to if you were to map the obesity epidemic on that, it would probably track. So obesity is one of the main risk factors for getting heartburn, and heartburn is the primary trigger for the progression. Reflux is part of the primary condition that leads to this kind of esophageal cancer.
Got it. Because essentially, if you have bad reflux, you have acid that's being regurgitated into the esophagus, which has a cellular lining that's not protective against that, and then over time, those cells essentially become cancerous. Correct? Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah. So it's not just let's just say it's gastric fluids, because it includes other things than the acid. It includes bile. And it's important when we talk about patients who are taking anti-acid medications like PPIs. And so you're right. The lower part of the esophagus is not designed to be exposed to that. The stomach is. The stomach has the lining is designed to handle acid and its own contents, but the esophagus isn't. So when there's reflux, when the stomach contents, which are not supposed to be in the esophagus, end up in the esophagus, there are cellular changes that occur that gradually work their way from an early precancerous transformation called metaplasia to a later precancer called dysplasia, and ultimately to esophageal adenocarcinoma, which is the kind of cancer we're talking about.
Roughly, just within the United States, how many people a year essentially get diagnosed with esophageal cancer? Roughly
22,000 people a year get diagnosed, and about 16,000 die per year. That's sort of more than people who die from, about the same as the people who die from driving, for example. It's a lot. It's Madison Square Garden, essentially full of folks every year that die. And again, all deaths are tragic. All cancer deaths are tragic, but these are particularly tragic because they are preventable, and we know exactly what to do with them. We have a lot of close relationships with gastroenterologists and a really, really strong advisory board. And we get all the time, a couple times a month, they'll send us an anecdotal, "Oh my God, you won't believe it. Yet another one. I just I just did an endoscopy on a 58-year-old father of three, you fill in the blanks, who came in with a long history of heartburn. Nothing was done with it. And he came in with some weight loss and some trouble swallowing. And we just put the scope down and we found a big, huge cancer. So that happens, every day. And every time that happens, it's tragic because we know who to test. We know how to test them. We know what to do when we find the precancer. We can go into that in a little bit more detail, but every aspect of what you would need for an early detection program and a cancer prevention program, they're all in place now. We just have to implement it and get patients access to prevent these cancers.
So your flagship product essentially is EsoGuard. Is it ESO or ESO?
ESO.
ESO. Okay, like esophageal. So walk us through like how, for essentially it's a DNA test. So how's the EsoGuard essentially implemented within the clinic setting?
Yeah, let me start with the cell collection side. So what the whole principle of this is that you have cells in the lower esophagus that have changed. Either they have early precancer, late precancer, or cancer. And there are subtle changes that happen to these cells as they're working their way through that spectrum that can be detected through modern molecular techniques. And we'll get to what that is in a second, but it's basically methylation, which is an epigenetic change, not mutational changes or things that where, the DNA is really, wildly abnormal. These are subtle changes to the epigenetics on several genes. So those subtle changes start with metaplasia and they work their way all the way through cancer. So the goal is, how do you find these? How do you get these cells, and how do you test for those changes to determine whether the patient has the condition along the spectrum here? So the first thing you have to do is you have to collect the cells. It's called, and the traditional way to do that is an endoscopy. Endoscopy requires intravenous sedation, requires two people to take the day off of work. It's an invasive procedure. They take a thing that's about the size of your thumb and shove it down your throat and look around in your lower esophagus and do biopsies, right? So that's been the standard of care for a long, long time. And in fact, there's been a recommendation that patients who have particular risk factors get endoscopies to prevent esophageal cancer, but that there's been very, very little, essentially no penetration of that. So what these faculty decided is that they figured out they had a pathway to develop a molecular test, but they realized that they had to come up with a way to sample the esophagus in a non-invasive way. There had been some previous work that was done with a sponge kind of device that was invented in the early 90s, where you could kind of take a sponge and it still exists, where it dissolves in the stomach, and then the capsule dissolves in the stomach, and you kind of scrape the whole esophagus using sort of this Brillo pad type device. Sounds kind of, it is sort of as gruesome as it sounds. So that had been around, but they knew that they needed something better than that, which would allow you to do targeted sampling of the cells. Because if you're looking for a needle in a haystack from a molecular point of view, you want to get cells that are actually in the area of your abnormality and not contaminated or diluted. So they came up with this really clever device called EsoCheck that allows you to collect in a targeted way just the lower 5 centimeters of the esophagus all the way down by the stomach, in a targeted way with no fluoroscopy, no x-ray, no video, just by the design of the device. We can talk about how it works in a second, and collect those cells. And then once those cells are collected, the cells get pulled into a capsule, and for the rest of the trip out, they're not exposed to other cells. So they're not going to be contaminated or diluted. So you're getting the best protected sample you can to send for your fancy molecular test. And so EsoGuard is our primary target, and I mentioned that to you earlier. But without EsoCheck, we wouldn't really be in the business of having the opportunity to have the impact, because the key is you have to be able to get the cells in a non-invasive way. That procedure has been done about 10,000, no, more than that, 15,000 times. We have a paper that's coming out that reports on 8,000 of those. Takes a minute or two to do. But the last time I had it done, it took 30 seconds. I was on a Zoom call like this, and I went around to the office around the corner, and one of our nurses was here, and 30 seconds I was done and came back. So it's a very simple office space, no anesthesia, just some sips of water, no sedation, that you can do, very rapidly. So that was really an important threshold.
Interesting. And actually, I got EsoCheck's video, so I'm going to play it so you can kind of like gives like a little play-by-play on this.
Yeah, so you can see there at the end of it, there's this balloon that's attached to a capsule. It moves a little quickly, so why don't you pause, go back a little bit, and then why don't you pause right there? Okay, so this is the working end of the device. It's got a balloon, which has it's a soft balloon with these little ridges on it, and you can see it's attached to a rigid capsule. That capsule is about the size of a vitamin pill or smaller, and that's attached to a silicone catheter, like a little piece of spaghetti. So that starts in the with the balloon in the capsule. So all you have is the capsule exposed, and the patient swallows that until it's in the stomach. And then once it's in the stomach, they know that by markings on the catheter. Actually, pause right there. Once it's there, once it's in the stomach, you pull back and it engages at the juncture between the esophagus and the stomach. So that's how they know where they are. It shows it to you. Just rewind a bit if you don't mind, Omar.
So essentially, it's getting pulled back, and you have these little dips within where you scrape.
Yeah, they swab. They don't even scrape. I would just say they swab more like a mouth swab for like a DNA test. Here it is. So this is a capsule, and it's in its uninflated state. So it's about the size of a pill. Yeah. All right, it's going to go through it systematically. The patient swallows it. Now it's in the stomach. The balloon's inflated and it's tugged back. And you see at that point, they know where they are. And then they pull back just 5 centimeters. Pull back, you deflate it and you pull the cells in the capsule. So for the rest of the trip out, it's not.
And it's protected. And what's interesting, what's good for the patient at least is that, when you're at this sphincter, there's not any, there are no nerves that you're going to feel this at all. And so they deflate it essentially after getting to that juncture and then pulling it back out you don't really feel, it's so small.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, it's really small. When you pull the sponge out, it's really kind of gruesome because you have this big sponge that's sort of dragging through the upper part of your mouth. So that's how it's done. Here's a little bit of a zoom in of the side of the balloon capturing the cells with those ridges, just sort of swathing them. And when it's deflated, the cells are pulled into the capsule, and then the capsule's removed.
Got it. I love that. And I love, I guess, the design of that because it's very simple and intuitive. And so once that's done, then EsoGuard essentially is used for their. Okay.
So the balloon is cut off into a preservation solution that we provide, and that's sent to our central laboratory. It's a process there. So the laboratory, we have a nice laboratory, 20,000 square feet in Lake Forest, California, full CLIA CAP certified laboratory with full NGS capacity. And once it arrives there, the DNA is extracted, and it undergoes PCR amplification and then actual sequencing, next generation sequencing of 31 sites, methylation sites on 2 genes. One gene that's been known to be associated with gastrointestinal abnormalities called vimentin, and another one called CCNA1, which seems to be specific to the esophageal process. And there's a bioinformatics algorithm that essentially counts how many methylation sites there are, and basically returns a positive or negative result based on how many of these sites are methylated, and based on that, the physicians are able to make appropriate decisions as to what the next steps are. Go through that as well.
Yeah, if you could, cover like a little bit more on the performance of the assay, because that'll be interesting as well.
Yeah. So you mean the actual how does it work in the lab?
Yes. Yeah.
Extraction is there's technologies that take the cells and break them up and extract the DNA and basically save them as a pellet, which can be then frozen. So that's done within typically the day that the sample arrives at the lab. And then the samples are batched and processed for amplification. So there are these two genes, and we amplify the DNA to overexpress, to overrepresent the DNA in these two regions of these two genes, CCNA1 and BINET. So that's the PCR part of it, the amplification part. Once that's amplified, the next primary step is the next generation sequencing using an Illumina NGS device, which literally sequences each base pair along these areas of the 31 sites on these genes. That all of that data is fed to this bioinformatic algorithm, which says, okay, which counts whether there's methylation at each of these 31 sites. 21 of those sites are on one gene, 10 are on another gene. If there's 80% methylation on either gene, it's considered a positive.
Got it.
A positive or negative result that the physician can apply.
And that turnaround, how long does that take? So if I go and have this done today, how soon do I find out?
The average turnaround time is about 10 days. We say up to 3 weeks, but average is about 10 days.
Okay, got it. And with EsoCheck, you guys have done about, you said 10,000 of these already?
10,000 in the past year. Right.
In the past year.
Total is pushing 20,000 right now, but in the past year, we did about 10,000.
How long is EsoCheck? How long has EsoCheck been commercially available?
The cell collection tool, the cell collection device has been available, was FDA cleared in 2019. And EsoCheck, the laboratory, as it was launched as a laboratory developed test in 2020.
So for that, and again, like I think patient access is extremely important. So you mentioned before, like when you go and get an endoscopy, aside from the fact that it's like a more invasive procedure, you mentioned, 2 people take the day off because you have a patient, and then somebody has to drive them because, like, you're getting anesthesia that day. So for this, you can do it in like a clinic setting, and you can do it a lot faster and easier. Is that the right way to think about it?
It's in an office setting, yeah. So it's done in just a regular medical office. As we can probably talk about later, we have health fair events where we go to fire departments or employers and do mass testing of folks in a room.
You do this one after the other, right?
One after another, yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because I would imagine you need like a pretty creative commercial strategy to do this. Because the whole idea is like not only awareness with clinicians to start administering this, but also for patients, right? So
I won't go through the whole evolution. I'll tell you how it evolved because it's pretty cool where we are right now. So our salespeople can walk into a physician's office of any specialty, a primary care physician, a GI, a surgeon, bariatric surgeon, ENT, a whole variety of different specialties, primarily primary care, and educate on the relationship between heartburn and cancer, remind them of that, of esophageal cancer, the risk factors and the profile of the typical patient. So there are guidelines now that absolutely recommend testing in a very clear population. The most conservative ones is people who have heartburn and 3 out of 6 risk factors: over 50, white male, obese, smoker, or family history. So if you have 3 of those risk factors and have heartburn, you're supposed to get tested. So we educate them on that. There are actually guidelines that are a bit more liberal than that from the American Gastroenterology Association. So we educate them on that and on the availability of an alternative to endoscopy. A non-invasive office-based alternative to endoscopy. That's usually all it takes. They're like, great, I have patients like this. Why wouldn't I do this to my patients? If you're in that target population, the well-defined population as to who should be tested, you have about a 10% chance of having precancer. So, of course, we should be testing these people, identifying precancer, monitoring those who are early, treating those who are late precancer with an ablation procedure, preventing cancer. So that whole paradigm is pretty easy to explain to physicians when they start. So then we get to the patient access part, which is, who's going to do the cell collection? How's that going to work, right? And we now have a methodology where we can offer a whole variety of options to them. One option is if they're in a city where we have a physical location where our own nurses operate a Lucid test center. We have those in about 20 locations in the country. We all arrange to have the patient come and have the cell collection done there. The most common way we handle that, if the physician, particularly if it's a GI or a large clinic within a health system, they're like, okay, great, you'll train one or more of our team members to do this, which we can do. We have really like 99% technical success rates with proper training. Great. So they'll offer it themselves. The middle ground is actually the most common one, where the physician says, I would like to do this. I don't really have the personnel, but we have space here to do it. And we say, no problem. Just give us a day, a blank, a day, a week, a day, a month, a day every 6 weeks, whatever cadence is required to sort of fill up a day with. Our nurses can do 30 of these in a day. So as much of up to 30 a day. And we will bring the nurse to come in and do the cell collection. And that way they're coming to the patient's coming to their own physician's office. It's very analogous in many ways to phlebotomy. You go to your primary care physician and there's a LabCorp phlebotomist there ready to draw your blood. Now they're there every day, obviously, but we aggregate the cases, but a very similar concept to do so. So those are the three of the common ways. And then the final one I had hinted at earlier, which are, we're not going to a physician, we're going to an entity like a fire department. Firefighters have a elevated risk of cancer overall, and the second most elevated risk is in esophageal cancer. They have about a 62% chance. So we've worked very closely with firefighters to get firefighters tested. We've done about 5,000 firefighters over the last year and a half. And in that situation, we're not going to the physician. We go to the leadership of the fire department, who are very focused on cancer, by the way, in their brothers and sisters. And we say, we can come and do testing to establish, to identify precancer and prevent cancer. And we set up an event. We set up a health fair event. Patients are screened through telemedicine in advance. We know what they have the risk factors. Those who have the risk factors come in for their 1 or 2 minute cell collection procedure, and they get the results, and we determine to do that.
That's fascinating. And then, like, when you take that that sort of approach in terms of commercial adoption, who's paying for it at that point?
Yeah, so that's the last mile here, right? So right now, we are in the late stages of securing Medicare reimbursement. We believe we have data now and hopefully we can go over our data, the performance of the assay in a bit, where we are working with a group called MolDX that controls a coverage of Medicare. They gave us a price several years ago when we submitted this test. And so we have an attractive price of $1,938 per test, with a really nice, very, very nice gross margin, really kind of best in class for this industry. But getting coverage is tough, right? So we're in the late stages. We have data now. We have a really solid evidence base. We've reviewed it with the MolDX group. We're with weeks away from being able to submit our data to Medicare for coverage, which we believe we will get. With the private payers, same thing. We work with them individually on shifting medical policy. We do get paid out of network. About 20% of the time we get paid. And the good news there is they pay us the price, right around the Medicare price, we get paid. So that's the last phase here. We know we have the whole physician adoption mechanics worked out extremely well. The patient access, the cell collection, having nurses in all those different venues being able to do the cell collection. We're in the last phases of securing reliable reimbursement now that we have the data to do so. That's one pathway. The other pathway to drive revenue that we're just getting started on is what we call direct contracting. And it's a really interesting angle. It's one that Grail has used with some success to generate quite substantial revenue. And that's direct contracting, where you don't go through the insurance process, but you engage directly with self-funded entities, such as employers and unions directly. And
like Walmart, for example,
any employer. I mean, they're small. I'll give you there, but there are actually plenty of about 50%. I didn't realize this number until we got into this. About 50% of patients are actually covered under self-funded plans. So I'll give you an example. We have a client, which is a car dealership in Texas, that had multiple sites. They had about 1,500 employees, if I recall, 1,200 employees, and we offered to test them on a contracted basis and did an event at their multiple locations and tested them and got paid directly from the employer. Similar with firefighters. We've started to do these firefighter events where we contract with the fire department in advance and arrange a contracted amount to perform these tests. But really another interesting angle, which is sort of related to this, is offering our test as a benefit. Again, that's not something that I was really aware of, but if you think of this whole ecosystem of companies getting their health and wellness benefit programs, right? Your medical and so forth. Those are offered through third-party administrators and brokers. There's a whole ecosystem that calls on employers and tries to sell them packages for health and wellness programs. We now have a pathway to add our test as a covered benefit as part of the health and wellness benefit program for companies. And we've started having some success doing that through brokers, where each employee gets a one-time opportunity to get tested if they have that, and it all gets paid directly through the employer and has nothing to do with with getting coverage under the traditional plans. So we've actually, again, Grail's done this with great success. We're starting to we've made some tweaks to our commercial team to try to push harder in this direct contracted area. We think that's going to start bearing fruit in the coming quarters.
That's really exciting too, because I feel that, you do have a recurring revenue model there, because essentially once an employer adopts it, it's not like they're going to do it only 1 year and get rid of it. They're going to do it every single year, right?
Not every patient every year. That's the advantage we have.
No, but they're going to not have that as part of their health.
Exactly. It's part of the package. You have, and it's funny, it's just like, you have your, I don't know, you have typically, a gym membership or smoking cessation or nutrition or other things that are, you sort of more commonly think that get tacked on to your standard medical and dental benefits, for example. This is becoming increasingly common to add diagnostic testing as an additional benefit. And it's actually less expensive than some of those because it's a targeted portion of your population and you get it, at least for now, you get it once. That's not true with the Grail test that's ordered every year. But it's really interesting, and it's a path that we're looking to push really aggressively.
That's really exciting. Yeah. And it's really interesting to hear that, at least you have two sort of types of innovation here. One is on the clinical innovation side where, you start with EsoGuard, and then you realize there's a better way to sort of scale the collection of cells, which is the EsoCheck, right? So now you're able to do it in clinics, you're able to do it in a fire department, et cetera. But then the business model innovation, which is going to these self-funded employers, which is really interesting, actually.
And what's behind all that is the data, right? So, we're poised to make great strides on the medical policy side, on getting a Medicare coverage and getting commercial coverage, because we've really expanded our clinical evidence base over the last, but call it a year or 18 months. So we had that original paper that I mentioned that Dr. Simon called me about when we first launched Lucid. But since then, we've really beefed that up. So now we have 4 clinical validity studies, 2 of them in a screening population, the 2 of them are case controls, that tell an incredible story of really unprecedented performance for detecting a precancer. So look, I'm not one to be hyperbolic about things, but it really is. And I'll sort of hopefully, let me see if I can convince you of that. Let's talk about Cologuard, for example. Wildly successful stool DNA test. Actually, the founder, and former CEO of Cologuard, of Exact Sciences, which markets Cologuard, is Stan Lapidus, who is one of our close advisors, and he's the vice chairman of our board. So we know the Cologuard story very well, and we actually have pretty good relations with the company as well. So Cologuard does really great at detecting cancer. Their sensitivity in the most recent, was up to 94%. So that's great. Okay? But for precancer, they do pretty well, better than certainly blood tests have been doing for these liquid biopsy blood test app. But the sensitivity for detecting an advanced adenoma, which is actually kind of the main thing you get your colonoscopy for. You get your colonoscopy not because you think you have cancer, but so that they can detect these precancerous conditions and snip them away before you develop cancer. That's the primary goal of colonoscopy. So Cologuard can detect advanced adenomas, which is a late stage precancerous condition, at about a 45% sensitivity. EsoGuard, now across these 4 studies, has mid to high. We have essentially 100% sensitivity for detecting cancer since we started taking the assay over. We haven't missed a cancer yet. For the precancerous conditions, early to late stage precancer, we're in the 85 to 90% range relative to 42%, 45% for Cologuard. So to be able to detect a precancer at an 85 to 90% sensitivity is truly unprecedented. There's no other example of that in the molecular.
I was going to say it's really high in terms of performance.
Really high. And it's in fact, so if you compare that to the advanced adenoma, that's great. But we preserve that sensitivity for early precancer, for the metaplastic changes, which are super subtle. Cologuard has 0 sensitivity at picking up just regular polyps that are not advanced adenomas. It does not pick up any early stage precancer. So we're not just picking it up across the spectrum of not just precancer, not just late precancer, but also early stage precancer. And even within the early stage precancers, there's a subgroup that are really important called short segment, where you only have like 1 to 3 centimeters, just a little patch of abnormality, which can be super hard to detect. We still preserve our sensitivity in like 85 to 90% range, even for short segment early precancer. That's unprecedented. That's what gives us the opportunity to have an impact on this cancer and to be able to prevent esophageal cancer and the deaths associated with it.
Again, I want to be careful when I ask this because you guys are a publicly traded company, but the idea is that after a certain time of commercial adoption or clinical adoption, that Lucid becomes a very attractive target for pharma in terms of like, once these things are diagnosed, what is the treatment you follow up with? Is that the way to think about it?
I don't think so much. I mean, I think we'll be an attractive target for those who want to, for diagnostic companies and those who want to be in the diagnostic space per se. This is not quite like what pharma is interested in, which is, companion diagnostics where you have a test that's associated with your therapy. This is preventative, right? This is what we're doing here is trying to prevent cancer. And so it's a different potential acquirer, but there are plenty of those that would seek to, there's a huge market opportunity. If you take the patients, those criteria that I talked about, the ACG criteria, so over 50, white, male, obese, smoker, family history plus GERD, there are 30 million patients who are recommended for screening with existing guidelines. And the existing guidelines have been updated to include us in the guidelines to say that non-endoscopic testing is an acceptable alternative with equivalent level of evidence to endoscopy. So that's 30 million people times just under $2,000. You can do the math. This is a huge total addressable market. And we are at the sort of the cusp of getting widespread coverage, which is exactly where these inflection points typically happen. You can look at the history of Cologuard and Exact Sciences. All of that value creation really started to accelerate once they got Medicare coverage.
Fantastic. I didn't realize that. And well, I'm really excited. First of all, thank you for coming on the show. And I'm looking forward to hopefully having you back like within about a year just to kind of report back like all the developments and everything. But in the meantime, for people to learn more, where can they learn more about the company, about the product, etc.?
Yeah, I think you said at the beginning, we have a brand new spanking website that I think does a really good job of telling the story, the elements of the story that I just said. That's luciddx.com. And the more commercial site that focuses on EsoGuard itself is called EsoGuard.com. And happy for people to reach out directly to us. info@luciddx.com will find its way towards me or one of our senior executives for any further questions.
Fantastic. Well, Sean, thanks so much for coming on the show. For the listeners, be sure to go and check out the website. I'm your host, Omar Khatib, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.